Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. In this video, we'll be refuting converted to Islam who's an apostate. He goes by the name of Neil, so don't be confused. In his video entitled Islam and Non-Muslim Religious Sites, we'll go through his video and refute every single one of his points and debunk and show that this person is dishonest, a liar, a manipulator, someone who distorts historical facts and Muslim history. We'll also delve into showing him the double standards when it comes to Christianity. We'll look at biblical verses that also expose this individual. Don't be fooled. Don't be manipulated. Just because he's lived Islam for 16 years or he can speak Arabic and understand it, he doesn't understand the Arabic. He can only narrate it in Arabic. He's very ignorant about Islam and will demonstrate that in this video segment. But please be patient. He has made several points, so will probably take a lot longer than his own video. But please be patient and see the clear refutations and expose the liar for he is. So let's play the video.
Hi. Despite living in modern times, you have witnessed the possibility of an Islamic state becoming a reality. So let's say you come from a Judeo-Christian background, but you convert to Islam and then you immigrate to an Islamic state. If your non-Muslim parents are religious and they come to visit you, how free do you think they would be to worship in the local church or synagogue? The answer should be obvious. Today's Islamic State is proof that whenever Islam becomes powerful in any country, you can usually say goodbye to non-Muslim religious sites. In fact, the Islamic State has captured and destroyed many churches in northern Iraq. Some examples are the St. George Monastery, the St. Ephraim Church, and also other churches in neighboring Syria. The Islamic trend is clear. When the situation is favorable to Islam, non-Muslim minorities will lose their religious sites to an Islamic State. However, in defense of Islam, you will often hear so-called moderate...
So let's pause it there. Notice the inconsistencies of these people. They first of all, instead of going to the Quran and then going to the Sunnah of the Prophet, that's how you're supposed to draw a conclusion. You don't go to what some Muslims claim to do under a khilafah and then assume that is the Islamic position when it comes to denigrating and desecrating mosques. That's not how it works. I mean, I don't start a debate against a Christian and say, hey, look at the Ku Klux Klan, look at the KKK, look what they're doing, and then draw my conclusion and say, here you go, that's Christianity. But that's what Abu Ismail is doing. He's desperately going into what some Muslims do in their behavior, and then he tries to generalize and conflate that to Islam. Again, that is a method of deception and dishonesty. Let's continue.
You will often hear so-called moderate Muslims claiming that today's Islamic State is not permitted to destroy, capture, and possess non-Muslim religious sites. And they back their defense by quoting Quran chapter 22 verse 40, which says, الَّذِينَ أُخْرِجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِهِمْ.
I'm just pausing it there because I really can't stand his Arabic. I mean, the guy literally reads Arabic in the Quran, but his audience is not Arabic, it's actually English-speaking people, but he does it to show off, just to say, oh look, he has some authority in the Quran, but he doesn't. I mean, any person who learns a bit of Arabic can recite it in Arabic. It doesn't mean he understands it. So I'm just going to ignore that and I'll translate exactly what it says. So basically it says, those who have been expelled from their homes unjustly only because they said, our Lord is Allah. For had it not been that Allah checks one set of people by means of another, monasteries, churches, synagogues and mosques, wherein in the name of Allah is mentioned, much would surely have been pulled down. Verily, Allah will help those who help his cause. Truly Allah is all strong and almighty. Okay, so let's continue on what he says.
Verily Allah will help those who help his cause. Truly Allah is all strong, almighty. So regarding this Islamic destruction, capture and possession of non-Muslim religious sites, who is correct? The so-called moderate Muslims or the Islamic State? I think to answer that question we need to refer to Muhammad. After all, Muslims believe he understood the Quran better than anyone. Well, this is the...
Okay, so let's just pause it there. Did you notice what he did? He read the verse in the Quran that Allah says that if it wasn't for Allah, if it wasn't for His mercy, if it wasn't for His blessing, if it wasn't for Him checking one nation by another, then all of the mosques and the churches and the synagogues would have been pulled out. He actually ignores that verse and he says, oh, if you want to understand Islam and if you want to understand the Quran, we need to now go to what Muhammad said. And then he goes on to talk about the pagans and the Kabbah. He just completely ignored the verse and said, let's put that aside and let's go and see what Muhammad did in Kabbah and what he did with the pagans. So it's clear that he got refuted by the verse, and the verse actually upholds the honor of churches, synagogues and mosques, and Allah clearly says that if it wasn't for the will of Allah, then surely they would have been pulled down, right? So Allah actually shows that all the mosques, the synagogues and churches are unified together under Allah. But see, he ignores that and then he tries to now bring up the pagans and the Kabbah. So let's go ahead and now refute him on that.
Kabbah in Mecca. It was a non-Muslim place of worship, but Muhammad converted it into a mosque. Version in his biography titled The Sealed Nectar. Page 394 says, quote, it, meaning the Kaaba, was unfortunately infested with idols that numbered 360. He, meaning Muhammad, knocked them down with his bow while reciting the verse of the noble Quran, وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ.
Okay, seriously, I can't stand the Arabic again. It says, and say truth Islamic monotheism is this, or jihad against polytheists has come, batil falsehood, Satan or polytheism has vanished. Surely batil is bound to vanish. Let's continue.
See, before the rise of Islam, the Kaaba in Mecca was revered as a sacred pagan sanctuary, a pilgrimage site, and a shrine containing hundreds of idols. Muhammad's tribe, the Quraysh, was in charge of the Kaaba. But when Muhammad claimed the shrine for his new religion of Islam, his tribe turned against him. Today, the site is a mosque, and the Kaaba no longer houses those idols. However, it still contains the black stone, or al-Hajar al-Aswad, a special object of veneration by the pre-Islamic pagans. Muslims still venerate this stone by kissing it or by waving their hands at it. So, from this sunnah or action of Muhammad, it appears the Islamic State does find justification for its own actions.
Okay, let's pause it there. I am actually completely baffled that this man, and by the way, he looks really angry in the picture. He looks pretty angry. I mean, I don't know, is it just me? Or, I mean, it's like he's converted outside Islam, but he just looks like a really depressed individual. I mean, I'm not making this as a personal attack. I mean, I hope Allah guides him, but he really does. I mean, can you see him in the picture? He really looks angry and upset. He really looks like he's unsettled. But anyway, so, I mean, I'm actually baffled that this man claims that he practiced the religion of Islam for 16 years. And in 16 years, he doesn't understand the history of the Kaaba. I mean, he didn't read the verses of the Quran that say that the Kabbah did not actually belong to the pagans, but the pagans actually hijacked the house of Abraham. The Quran actually says that the Kabbah belonged to Ibrahim alayhi salam, and Ibrahim alayhi salam built it himself. And the house that Abraham built obviously did not contain idols, because Abraham was not an idol worshipper. But if you ever considered reading the Islamic history, which you haven't obviously, Abu Ismail, the Quran makes specific references that it was Abraham who built it. And over the years, as you know, people start deviating. So the Arabs, the pre-Arabian pagan Arabs at the time, were not always pagans. They used to worship Allah, the one true God. And they used to do this through the tradition of Abraham alayhi salam. But over the centuries and years, what happened is they started deviating. And just like the people of children of Israel, they used to follow Moses, they used to follow the commandments of Yahweh. And what happened? Moses went away for 30 or 40 days, something like that. And they started worshipping the cow. And Moses was angry when he came back. Similar event happened with the pagan Quraysh. They were supposed to be on the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And what happened? They deviated, so they filled the house of idols. So what did the Prophet, peace be upon him, do? He restored that house of Ibrahim by removing the idols, which is in fact consistent with your own Bible. Let's have a look. Now this is from the Bible in Deuteronomy 12:2. It says, and this is Yahweh's commandment. This is the same God that Ismael worships now. He converted to Christianity. This is the same God, right? He accuses Islam of destroying idols and so forth. Look what his own God says. Deuteronomy 12:2. Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every spreading tree, where the nations you are disposing worship their gods. Verse 3. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and burn their Asherah poles in fire. Cut down the idols of their gods and wipe out their names from those places. Verse 4. You must not worship the Lord your God in their way. Verse 5. But you are to seek the place the Lord your God will choose from among all your tribes to put his name there for his dwelling. To that place you must go. So notice, Yahweh actually detests any idols. He says, go look at those places. If you see people worshipping under trees, worshipping idols and so forth, he says to destroy them and break them. So what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did is consistent of Yahweh instructions and his laws commanded in his Bible. So the Prophet Muhammad fulfilled that same tradition, because that house that belonged to Abraham, that house of worship that Abraham built himself, that was later contaminated by pagans who worshipped idols and associated gods with Allah. So then those idols were smashed and broken according to Deuteronomy 12:5, your commandment of the Bible, which is consistent what Prophet Muhammad did. So the Prophet Muhammad is consistent with the law in your own Bible. I'll post a hyperlink below this video and you can see it for yourself, the history on how the Kabbah was built. This is in Sahih translation in Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 4, book 55, number 583. And you can read the whole narration here where Abraham and Ismael actually built the Kabbah. And you can see the whole narration there of how they actually raised the foundations. It says, Abraham asked, will you help me? Ismael said, I will help you. Abraham said, Allah has ordered me to build a house here, pointing to a hillock higher than the land surrounding it. The Prophet added, "Then they raised the foundations of the house, the Kabbah. Ismael brought the stones and Abraham was building it." So you can see the whole narrations here that the Kabbah actually originates to Ibrahim alayhi salam. So I am absolutely baffled and shocked how converted to Islam is absolutely ignorant about the history of the Kabbah. Yet he was a Muslim for 16 years. Again, in the Quran, in Surah 22, verses 26 to 27, it says, "Behold, we gave the site to Abraham, the sacred house Kabbah. Associate not anything worship with me, and sanctify my house for those who come pass around it, or stand, or bow, or prostrate themselves therein, and proclaim the pilgrimage among men. They will come to thee on foot and mounted on every kind of camel, lean on account of journeys through deep and distant mountain highways." So as you can see, the Kaaba is actually Abrahamic and Quranic, yet Ismael, converted to Islam, completely has absolutely no idea about the origins. I'm baffled. As for the Prophet Muhammad venerating the black stone, he claims that this is from the pagans. Actually, no, it was the Quraysh who told the Prophet to pick up the black stone, and it was the Prophet Muhammad, according to the Hadith narrations, who actually put the black stone into the Kaaba. And of course, the black stone was only a part of the Kaaba. It wasn't ever worshipped by the Quraysh. I've actually debated many Christians, and they always make the claim that the pagans actually worship the black stone, but the black stone was never worshipped by the Quraysh. Only the idols were. And you can go to any polemic work, go to any website, ask them to bring the proof of the pagans who actually worship the black stone, and it's not found anywhere. It's only a monument part of the Kaaba, and it's a starting point to start the pilgrimage. So that's all it is. And it's not part of paganism in the sense that they used it for idol worship. In fact, in Sahih al-Tirmidhi, this actual claim is actually refuted. According to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the black stone is an object that fell from Jannah, and it was originally white as milk, but the sins of humanity eventually turned it into black. This is based on the hadith narration in Sunan al-Tirmidhi. So this begs the question, any loving person would desire to kiss that which he loves, such as his wife, wouldn't they? So if one accepts the idea that the stone did indeed come from heaven, is it not worthy to be kissed out of love for paradise from our original inhabitants, which is from heaven? So this isn't a kiss or a touch and love out of, thinking that we worship this. No, this is out of admiration and love, because this stone belongs to paradise and Jannah, as Al-Tirmidhi reports. I'll also put a hyperlink below this video and you can actually see it. There is evidence even in the Bible. Jacob used a rock as a pillar for worship, and even used to put oil on his own rock, and it used to be part of the monastery. And we'll put that hyperlink below this video so you can go and have a look at it. In fact, even Jews are known to wail at a particular wall which is made out of stones and rocks, and they actually even kiss it. Here is a biblical verse, Psalms 138:2. It says, "I will bow down towards your holy temple and will praise your name for the unfaithful loving and your faithfulness for having exalted you," and so forth. So you have a verse even in your own Bible that says you can pray towards a temple, and that temple is made out of stones. So do Christians now worship, or do Jews and Christians now worship paganistic rituals because they also bow down to rocks? And of course, we know that Christians actually kiss and adore the cross. We see them kiss it. If it's worn around their neck, do they now worship the cross, do they? Or is it just out of veneration because it is part of the theology of the Christian faith? The rock is part of the sanctuary of the mosque. And so what is wrong with adoring it? It's a piece that has come from paradise. So the Christians are desperate. They can't actually physically show that it was worshipped. And even Umar ibn Khattab said, you are only a rock, and you have got no power to benefit anyone nor harm anyone. This is also found in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. And again, I'll post the narrations and the hadiths below in the hyperlink so you can see it for yourself. Now, there's a tone of hypocrisy in Abu Ismail, converted to Islam. I mean, he basically, you'll see towards the end of the video, he goes on to say how, Hagia Sophia, which is a mosque in Istanbul, and that was converted, he argues, obviously, it was converted from Christianity to Islam. And he actually yearns for it to be recaptured. He yearns for the Russians to come and fight for it, the Orthodox sect of Christianity, to fight for it, and so they can reclaim it back from the Turks, from the Muslims, right? And this is really interesting to me. Why? Because of the fact that it didn't obviously belong to the Muslims, and he makes the argument that it should be recaptured even by force, and he even proclaims a crusade, and I can show you the screenshot where he proclaimed that. But then there are double standards now, because the Prophet of Islam is now also recapturing the Kabbah, which originally was Ibrahim alayhi salam's, and the Prophet Muhammad wanted to restore that house and cleanse it from the idols. So do you notice the hypocrisy? So he supports an invasion of the Turks so they can recapture that particular mosque and convert it back into Constantinople and back into Hagia Sophia. So back from Islam, he wants it back to Christianity. Why? Because he believes that it was originally the Christians. So let's go ahead and see his own testament. So here is a screenshot that was captured by Paul Williams, and Ismael writes, I quote, he says, a jihadi killed the Russian ambassador to Turkey. He then says, maybe it's time Christianity takes Constantinople back. Spot the clue in Russian crosses? And then Paul Williams writes back and says, converted to Islam, reviving the old crusading spirit, jihadi Christianity. What a clever idea, Neil. So, as you can see, Ismail is wanting that Hagia Sophia and Constantinople be recaptured by Christianity. But then he has double standards when the Prophet Muhammad is recapturing the Kabbah that was actually defecated and contaminated by idols that really belonged to Abraham. Double standards. And then interestingly, Ismail Abu Adam, he writes in the screenshot, he says, come on, Paul, my question was intended to be only hypothetical and rhetorical, to wake Muslims up. I don't call for violence. And look how he's lying, right? And Paul Williams writes back and says, of course you don't, Neil, yet you have endorsed Christian holy war before. And he says, see the comment before. So Ismail got caught out in the screenshot. He obviously wants a holy war back to recapture the Christian apparent churches at that time. And that's why he's probably made this video, to make an awakening for the Christians to recapture Hagia Sophia. We will get to Hagia Sophia and we will actually show the inconsistencies when we get to that argument. Be patient. Let's continue.
The Sunnah of Muhammad is not the only place where they find justification. They also look to his authoritative companions. We see from the biography of Umar ibn al-Khattab the second rightly guided caliph in Islam, that after his army conquered Jerusalem, he initially built a small prayer house on the Temple Mount, which is the most sacred site for Jews. Umar's action laid the foundation there for the construction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque by later caliphs. Now think about that again. The Temple Mount is the most sacred site in the world for Jews, yet there's an Islamic mosque built on it. And if that's not bad enough, what do you think the Muslims did to the second most sacred?
Okay, so we'll first address his claim about Al-Aqsa and refute him on his assertions. First of all, did you notice how he leaves the Quran and the Hadith, right? He leaves that. He leaves the instruction of the Prophet Muhammad. He tried to use the Prophet Muhammad as an example and he got debunked on the Kabbah and we refuted him on that. But what does a desperate man do when the Quran doesn't add up, the Prophet Muhammad doesn't add up? He then runs off to the Khilafah. The Khalif, the fourth Khalif, Umar ibn Khattab. But notice the inconsistency here. Forgive me, I meant the second Khilafah. So Umar ibn Khattab, he quotes what he did at Al-Aqsa, and it says, and I quote, notice that what Abu Ismail said, quote, that Umar actually built a small place for like a prayer room, part of that actual building. So how is that even desecrating or destroying or converting that area, the area of the Jews, into a mosque? It's not. He built an actual prayer room joining the prayer room with the Jews. Because as you know, Prophet Sulaiman is understood to be a prophet in Judaism and in Islam, so there is a heritage between the two. So when the Muslims actually took control of that area and the Jews were under Muslim rule, then obviously they were going to partake in the worship of the same sacred areas, because that is both connected to Judaism and it's connected to Islam. And notice it says a small prayer room, which is part of it. That's like going to the airport and building a little mosque area for the Muslims to pray in. And that's exactly what that area signified. And that's why if you go to that area, now under the occupation of the Jews, that they still allow Muslims to worship and pray in those areas. So how is that hijacking the actual prayer place of Judaism? See the nonsensical, desperate attempts that he does. Now pay attention to this. Look what he says and watch how he gets completely butchered by the hadith that he quotes. So let's listen to what he says about it being a very sacred place for the Jews.
Now think about that again. The Temple Mount is the most sacred site in the world for Jews, yet there's an Islamic mosque built on it. And if that...
Okay, now if that doesn't get worse, that's what he's going to say. Notice what he said, it is the most sacred place. Let's toggle back at the hadith and see how sacred this place was for the Jews. Okay, let's see how sacred it was. Notice the hadith he quoted, or the saying from Ibn Taymiyyah. Notice what it says in the second last paragraph. It says, because it says, here we go, when Umar ibn Khattab conquered Jerusalem, there was a huge garbage dump on the rock because the Christians used to deliberately treat it in disrespectful manner to annoy the Jews who used to pray in that direction. Umar issued orders that the filth be removed and said to the Kabbah. So notice, look, Abu Ismail claims it is the most sacred, holy sanctuary for the Jews, yet the same narration that he quotes in Ibn Taymiyyah says it was the Christians who actually used it as a rubbish dump. I mean, did he just butcher himself there or what? I mean, he accuses the Muslims for cleaning the rubbish up and building a prayer room, a prayer area, not on top, but in the vicinity of that area to worship respectfully with the Jews. But it was the Christians who denigrated and desecrated that area of worship by using it as a rubbish dump. Now, I like to ask the question, how sacred was this place for the Jews, really, that the Christians would use it as a rubbish dump? So he has a problem of a prayer room being built in that sanctuary for the Muslims to worship with the Jews together, the Yahweh or Allah, but then he doesn't have a problem with Christians, his Christians, using that place as a rubbish dump. Now, I know what you might do. You may say, oh, well, Umar ibn Khattab was making that up. That's a fallacy, because that's the narration. You can't pick and choose what you want to accept. If you're quoting that hadith or that narration from Ibn Taymiyyah, you need to be consistent and accept all of it. And in all of it, it says that the Christians were using it as a rubbish dump. You just refuted yourself. You refuted yourself to claim that the Jews looked at it as a place of sanctuary and looked at it as a place of sacred. That could have happened later. In that time, it obviously needed cleaning up. It was used as a garbage dump. The Jews weren't paying real attention to it. Thanks to the Muslims, they've cleaned it up and turned it into a unification of a place of worship between the Jews and the Christians. And yet you have a problem with Umar ibn Khattab. How dare you, you hypocrite?
Now think about that again. The Temple Mount is the most sacred site in the world for Jews.
Yes, very sacred, that your Christians used it as a dumpster section. Can you imagine that? Imagine that we Muslims went to Cathedral Square, we then overtook it and we used it as a place of dumpster. I mean, can you imagine the abuse of what you would say about the Muslims if we use Cathedral Square as a dumpster place? So there you go. The Quran didn't work for him. The Prophet Muhammad didn't work for him. Umar ibn Khattab's accusation on Al-Aqsa didn't work for him. So now he will go to another mosque. Let's listen.
If that's not bad enough, what do you think the Muslims did to the second most sacred site for Jews? Well, the same thing happened there. In Hebron, at the Cave of the Patriarchs, containing the tombs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Muslims converted the site into a mosque, although it was originally a Jewish place of prayer. To this day, you can still see the two above the building. Of course, these are not the only examples I can give, but they're enough to prove that after Islamic conquests of non-Muslim lands and under Islamic rule, Muslims regularly established mosques on Jewish or Christian sanctuaries, even the ones associated with biblical personalities.
Okay, so let's go ahead and refute him on this mosque. The Islamic point is the enclosure is known to Muslims as the Ibrahim Mosque, as Abraham is a revered prophet of Islam who, according to the Quran, built a sacred house of sanctuary. The exact location is not known. After the conquest of the city by Umar, the holy place was simply taken over by the Jewish tradition. By new rulers of Herodon, enclosure was converted into a mosque and placed under the control of Wafaq. Wafaq continues to maintain most of the site, though the Israeli military controls access to the site. According to some Islamic sources, it is also the tomb of Joseph, though the Bible has Joseph buried in Shalom. So as you can see, that Abu Ismail completely distorted the facts like Al-Aqsa. That particular area is not just sacred for the Jews, it is sacred for also the Muslims, as it is a place of burial for the tomb of Joseph. This is according to some Islamic traditions. So notice the deception and the double standards and the inconsistency here. When the Jews claim that God gave them Israel and the lands of Palestine, they suddenly become a complete ownership of it, even though the native people of that land are Muslims. But apparently this is completely justified. But when Muslims take over an area that was a sanctuary, a place of tomb for Prophet Joseph, then that now becomes controversial. It suddenly becomes Muslims are overtaking a Jewish synagogue. Notice the double standards and the hypocrisy here. In fact, there's a noble verse in the Quran that says, "Woe unto the Christians and Jews, for they built places of worship upon the graves of their prophets." So if anything, it was the Jews who actually misused the holy places and denigrated the grave of the prophets by simply building churches or synagogues over them, and then we couldn't recognize where their burial sites were. And the bottom line is this: there is no conflict. The Jews are still allowed to worship at their sanctuaries, and the Muslims are allowed to worship at their sanctuaries. And why can't they do it in unification? And they do it already. So what's the problem? Now I think it's time we can refute him and show him. Remember, he quoted ISIS and how ISIS goes and destroys places of worship and so forth, and the Christian sites, and pulls down crosses and does all those sorts of things. Let's now compare that to what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said. And remember, Abu Ismail said, if you want to understand the Quran, then go to the Prophet Muhammad. So let's now go to the Prophet Muhammad and clearly debunk this liar. Here is a letter, and I'll read it to you. It's called The Promise to St. Catherine. This was a letter that was written by the Prophet Muhammad, and it was ordered for his companions to distribute it under the Khilafah and the Covenant. And this is what it says: "This is a message from Muhammad ibn Abdullah. As a covenant to those who adopt Christianity near and far, we are with them. Verily, I, the servants, the helpers, and my followers defend them, because Christians are my citizens. And by Allah, I hold out against anything that displeases them. No compulsion is to be on them, neither are their judges to be removed from their jobs, nor their monks from their monasteries. No one," now pay attention to this, "no one is to destroy a house of their religion, to damage it, or to carry anything from it to the Muslim houses. Should anyone take any of these, he would spoil God's covenant and disobey his prophet. Verily, they are my allies and have my secure charter against all that they hate. No one is to force them to travel or to oblige them to fight. The Muslims are to fight for them. If a female Christian is married to a Muslim, it is not to take place without her approval. She is not to be prevented from visiting her church to pray. Their churches are to be respected. They are neither to be prevented from repairing them, nor the sacredness of their covenants. No one of the nation Muslims is to disobey the covenant till the last day." This was penned down at 628 AD, and I'll post the link below. So did you notice, nor the Prophet Muhammad, nor Umar ibn Khattab ever destroyed the sanctuaries. If anything, Umar ibn Khattab added and expanded the sanctuaries, and he did not destroy and pull them down, nor did he remove or take away anything from it. So this is clear proof that the Umar ibn Khattab, the Khilafs, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, through his narration and through his letter, promised the protection of those churches and asked for it not to be desecrated or destroyed. But I know what Abu Ismail is going to do. He's going to quote several verses where idols, the Prophet Muhammad was ordered to go and destroy idols and so forth. That's conflating a difference. I mean, even Christians today, I know the Protestants who actually go against the Roman Catholics and say, you fill your churches with idols and so forth, and they actually want them destroyed. So if a church has an idol, like an actual idol, even Umar ibn Khattab said, he said, I will enter a church and pray in there, but if there's any idols in there, he won't pray in there. So basically, if there are any idols in there and the area is not in use anymore and it gets taken over by Muslims and the Christians aren't using it anymore because they're converting to Islam, then of course, as the Kabbah was destroyed with idols, so can the idols be cleansed out. But that's after conversion and so forth. And that's exactly what happens even in Christian history. And I'll even quote you a source which states that Christians actually took over pagan monasteries and actually used them because it was no longer in use. And I'll give you the reference. Here you go. You can see it under Wikipedia. It says Christianized sites. And if you go below the page, and I'll read exactly what verbatim. Okay, verbatim for what it says, as you can see in the last paragraph, and I'll put a hyperlink below this video so you can see, it says, after the peace of the church, the old pagan temples continued to function but gradually fell into disuse. Now, why did it fall into disuse? It doesn't really tell us. Was it the invasion of the Crusades? That could be a possibility. It says, and were finally all closed by the decrees of Theodosius. So notice it was actually closed down. And you can see Theodosius was eventually a Christian. He was a Roman emperor, and he made the official religion of the Roman Empire the Nicene Christianity, the official state church of the Roman Empire, as an Orthodox sect. So this same Christian emperor, he closed down the pagan temples of worship. As you can see, after the peace of the church, the old pagan temples continued to function, but gradually fell into disuse and were finally all closed by the decrees of Theodosius at the end of the 4th century. Initially, they were shunned by Christians, perhaps because of their pagan associations, but also because of their shape did not suit Christian requirements. To the early church, only one sort of building seemed suitable for Christianization, the basilica, which had previously always been a secular type building. So notice what they did. The Christians, they forced the pagans to close down these churches, these pagan temples. Then what they did was they couldn't use them because they didn't, you can see the picture here, they weren't suitable for the Christian type of worship. So then what did they do? They actually took over one particular building, the basilica, which suited the Christian worship temple. So they took over it. Double standards here. You have Christians who are what you're accusing Muslims of doing. You have Christians doing the very same thing, if not worse, under Christianity. Should we say under Christianity? There you have it. So we have early Christians taking over pagan monasteries and temples, closing them down and forcing them, and of course running it as now Christian churches. So there you have it. This is, and you earlier accused the Prophet Muhammad of closing down a pagan Kabbah, apparently, and taking over it. Amazing double standards. Addition to that letter that was sent by the Prophet Muhammad protecting the sanctuary of the Jews and the Christians, you can see how clearly there is another narration in Book Al-Tabari, Volume 3, page 609, and this is the Umar ibn Khattab he accuses. And look at what Umar ibn Khattab says. He says, by Umar ibn al-Khattab with the citizens of Ilia, Jerusalem, stated, This is the protection which the servant of Allah, Umar ibn Khattab, the commander of the faithful, extends to them non-Muslims. He says, the safeguarding of their lives, property, churches, crosses, and their entire community. Their churches are not to be occupied, demolished or damaged, nor are their crosses or anything belonging to them to be touched. They will not be forced to abandon their religion, nor will they be harmed. None of the Jews will live with them in Ilya, Jerusalem. This is clear and stated in the Hadith. So when he quotes ISIS pulling off crosses from churches and doing all of those things to the churches, look at Umar ibn Khattab that teaches the complete contrary. Notice he referred to ISIS, and to back ISIS up he referred to Umar ibn Khattab. Yet Umar ibn Khattab refutes the notion and says that their churches and their crosses that belong to them should not be touched. And in the beginning of his video, Abu Ismail's video, he showed ISIS tearing off crosses, which actually proves that ISIS is not Islamic, and Abu Ismail has been refuted by Umar ibn Khattab, which he accuses. Amazing. Let's continue.
But this video would be incomplete if I did not mention the Ottoman Islamic Empire, famous for desecrating and converting many churches into mosques. One of those churches is the famous Hagia Sophia, or in Turkish, the Hagia Sophia. It was a very important Eastern Orthodox Christian church because it was a cathedral and the seat of the Patriarch of Constantinople, a spiritual leader for Eastern Orthodox Christians. Constructed in the year 537 before the time of Muhammad, it was the world's cathedral for nearly 1,000 years. However, in 1453, the Muslim Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, and consequently the cathedral was converted into a mosque. After the Ottoman Islamic Empire was abolished, the church a museum. Actually, when I was a Muslim, I visited the museum. So here's some video footage of my...
Okay, let's go ahead and refute him on this point. When we analyze something, you need to accept the context. What he does is say, okay, let's ignore all the context. A particular church was overtaken. It was crusaded. Hence, let's say that the Muslims have taken over. So let's conflate that and say, look, this is what the Quran teaches and this is what the Hadith teaches. Do you understand that in the beginning and throughout this video, I've narrated clear narrations showing that the churches are not to be desecrated, destroyed, and they're supposed to be left as it is for the Christians to worship in them, as long as they're under Islamic rule and they pay the jizya and so forth. There is no harm against them. But notice he goes on and sees what the Seljuks did, or what the end of the Ottomans did with Mehmet and so forth, and to say, look, this is the fruits of Islam and this is the example of Muslims. But you see, the issue is a lot more complicated and a lot more complex than that. And it may not be exactly the way it is. Maybe there was a huge context to the situation. Now you're probably thinking, what is he saying? Well, what I'm saying here is that the churches in England, you have them, don't you? Don't you have churches in England? How many of those churches are unused? How many of those churches have now been sold to Muslims? The Birmingham Mosque, the Green Lane Mosque, all of these churches, they have been converted to mosques. Now, why were they converted? Because it was not in use, and the Muslims came and brought them from the Christians, and they changed them into mosques. There was no jihad in England. So that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there may be a context to the situation. It's not necessarily A, the Muslims conquered, B, they took over the church, C, the Muslims are the aggressors. No, it may very well not be that. It may very well be that A, the Muslims conquered that area under control, and B, the Christians did not want to live under that ruling, and C, that maybe the Muslims then took over those places of worship because it wasn't used. Remember what Theodosius did? He took over a pagan temple. He actually closed it down and said it was not even used, and he then converted Basili, that particular temple, into a church. So why? Because it was misused. So why doesn't Abu Ismail then critique the Roman Emperor Theodosius for doing that? And how come he doesn't look at the context being equivalent the same here, that it was misused? But you see the double standards. And there was even more complex issues which he doesn't mention. But look, when we study the narrations and investigate it, it even gets worse for Abu Ismail, because we are told when we go into the history and the text, it even brings up more eye-opening cases against Abu Ismail. Abu Ismail is very condescending. He left one thing very crucial out. And did he purposely do it? I think he did. I think he conveniently left it out. Well, what he said is that from the date of the construction in 537 AD and until 1453, it served as an Eastern Orthodox cathedral and seat of the Patriarch of Constantinople. But listen to what it says here in his, except between 1204 and 1261, when it was converted by a fourth crusade to a Catholic cathedral under the Latin Empire. So look what happened, folks. The actual church